Snow Treasure by Marie McSwiggan. Chapter 1. Beat you to the turn! Peter Lundström shot his sled down the long, steep slope. No fair, you started first, his friend Michael Berg protested. Nevertheless, he flew along in Peter's tracks. School was over for that day at least, and Peter and Michael were enjoying one of the sled rides the children of Norway never seemed to tire of. At the turn they paused for breath, but their rest was short, for Peter spied another sled. Look out! Here come the girls! With that he headed down another slope, his friend behind him. Peter was 12 and felt grown up. Playing with girls was something he meant never to do. Heavy clothes hid all but his yellow hair and his face. His eyes were clear and brown, wide apart and in an even line. They looked untroubled. Michael, the same age, seemed different in everything else. While Peter was tall and slender, Michael was square. His hair was like tow, and his eyes were that bright blue that is often called typically Scandinavian. Hey, wait a minute! A dark-eyed girl drove her sled into the place the boys had just left. Her black curls bobbed like sausages under the cherry red of her hood. She was Helga Thompson and somewhat of a tomboy. Behind her on the same sled was a smaller girl. Fair as Helga was dark. The small girl was Lovisa, Peter's 10-year-old sister. We'll catch them at the lookout. Hold on! Helga dug her heels into the snow and began another swift descent. Catch them at the lookout they did, for the sled track made a sharp twist, and below that, nearly 1,000 feet, lay the sea. Peter and Michael had to slow down to avoid crashing a wall that protected the road. Helga, daring as any boy, drove straight at them, so there was a clamor of yells and a tangle of windbreakers, caps, sweaters, and mittens. There never had been such a winter for snow. It began early, and with each month grew higher and higher on the ground. April was like January, with no sign of thaw. From one end of Norway to the other, people talked of nothing else. They only stopped talking about it when something entirely terrifying drove it from their minds. Then they remembered it again and looked to it to help them in their trouble. Up in the Arctic Circle where these children lived, it was winter for much of the year. Sleds and skis were used for travel for all but a few months. But accustomed as the people were to the long cold and the white stillness, the winter of 1940 surpassed anything even the oldest could remember. The mountains seemed asleep that April. Along the sea the world was lifeless. Except for the fjords, the harbors here in the north were ice-locked, their channels great fields of white. The fjords alone seemed alive with their black rushing waters and bobbing ice cakes. These forceful streams flow too fast for freezing, and so are always a highway to the open sea. The four friends at the lookout continued their lively play. Peter and Michael tried to wash Helga's face, but the snow was too hard and dry, and the face washing could hardly have been called successful. Helga managed to get a handful of snow down Peter's back, and that did amount to something, for he had a bit of trouble shaking it out to prevent the discomfort of its melting. Tired of the tussle, the four squatted on their sleds. When Michael idly tossed a lump of snow in Helga's lap, she got up to shake her dress. In doing so, she turned toward the sea. Why, Peter, there's your Uncle Victor! She was surprised. And Rolls, his mate, look! You're crazy. Peter didn't bother to get up. But it is your Uncle Victor, honest! Now what in the world would he be doing here? You don't suppose he's fishing this time of year, do you? But it is, Peter, come see! She was so sure about it that he got up, if only to be able to tell her she was wrong. Below, miles away, by road, but only a little distance for a stone, Uncle Victor was making footprints in the hard snow. Behind him was the stocky figure of Rolls, second in command of the Lundström fishing fleet. Yoo-hoo, Uncle Victor! Lovisa was on her feet and looking out over the wall of the lookout, but she could not make him hear. Yoo-hoo! The four of them yelled in chorus, cupping their hands to make the sound carry farther. Then Victor Lundström heard them and looked up, but there was no great roar of greeting the children had expected. He only waved his arm and went on walking. Roll saw them too, and gave an equally casual salute. Peter scowled. The greeting was unlike Uncle Victor. Why, he should have been overjoyed to see them, especially after a long trip. He was Peter's favorite relative and, in all truth, his hero. He led a life of adventure in contrast with Peter's father, a banker. He was one of the most successful fishermen in that land of able fishers. He had a whole fleet of boats that sailed about everywhere, his nephew supposed. When he came back from a voyage, he had stories to tell that no one could match. Uncle Victor was as fond of his brother's children as they were of him, so it wasn't like him not to seem glad to see them. "What's he doing here?" Michael wanted to know. They watched him walk along the beach toward the cliff beyond Ryswick Fjord. "He's on his way to the Snake," they decided. The Snake was a tiny arm of the big fjord, so twisted and narrow that it deserved its name. Unless you knew about the Snake, you never would have guessed it was there. Almost entirely hidden by cliffs, even from the air, it would be hard to trace. To the Clang Pearson, Lovisa's eyes danced, for the Clang Pearson was Uncle Victor's own fishing boat, the one that he alone might sail. The children were permitted aboard only as a special treat. "But why is he here?" Peter pondered. "He never comes north until the ice is gone." But he had no time for further reflection when a snowball broke in his face. "So you thought I was crazy," Helga taunted. "Crazy as a hare." Michael's snowball landed in Helga's hood. It spattered on her eyes and face were white. She lowered her head and shook it from side to side like a fierce young animal, and then she charged at her tormentor. Meanwhile, Lovisa had not been idle. Her fast-moving mittens were busy rolling hard pellets of snow. Then she stood back and hurled with all her strength and all the skill she had been able to acquire by watching and imitating the boys since she was old enough to remember. Helga and Peter were locked in a tussle when Lovisa came to her friend's rescue. One swift ball caught Peter in the ear, and he turned, surprised, to see who his assailant might be. Then Michael brought up a hatful of snow to give Helga another face-washing, but Lovisa's ball caught him so abruptly he stumbled and fell. "Come, Helga, let's get out of here while we're on top." Lovisa believed in securing her victories. She preferred not to chance a smashing defeat by remaining. But Helga parted her feet in a defiant stance and stood ready to meet all comers. "What do you want to run away for?" she jeered at Lovisa. "I should think anyone who could hit as hard as you would be glad to stay and fight it out." Here was high tribute. It came from one who was not any older, but was a recognized leader among the girls of Ryswick. Lovisa glowed in the praise, but that did not stop her busy mittens. They were piling many rounds of ammunition on Helga's sled. "Look out!" Helga warned, just in time to prevent Peter stealing the sled and all the snowballs. So Peter got the first of Lovisa's bullets and had to stand crossfire when Helga opened up from the other side. And so the battle went on. The boys, for all their strength and size, did not seem able to subdue the quick-witted girls, and none of them seemed to tire of the brisk exchange of snow. "Good glory, it's getting dark!" Peter was first to realize that the afternoon was over. Absorbed in the fight, the four of them failed to note the passing time. "We're all going to be late for supper, and we'll get what's coming to us." What that was, he didn't have to explain, for they all understood it was no pleasant prospect. "Come on, let's get out of here." There was a scramble for sleds, caps, mittens, and even sweaters that had been discarded as the battle grew hot. Then began the long climb up the mountain to Ryswick, the town that stood on a level shelf of the mountain slope. As Peter predicted, he and Lovisa were late for their evening meal, but what's coming to us never came. Their father was busy with his own thoughts, and their mother could always be counted on to keep peace in the family, especially when Mr. Lundstrom was home. When they told of seeing Uncle Victor, a strange thing happened. Their father pushed back his chair and jumped up from the table. Peter and Lovisa were surprised because they had never before seen him leave a meal unfinished. "My hat and coat, Per Garson," he called to the old family servant. "Victor's back from Oslo. I've got to go out." Per Garson, entering with the coffee, all but dropped the tray.